Hi everyone and welcome. Um, Again, just to echo what Costa just said, I hope everyone is safe and well and adapting to the various isolation issues that we're all facing at the moment. Just a little bit about me, as Costa said, 20 years of experience. I initially was a PE teacher in a secondary school here in the UK and got into using technology probably about 10, 11 years ago to see the benefits of how it could support learners in the classroom. And things have really built from there in terms of seeing the impact it has on learning in general. Um, and that kind of leads me neatly into what we're doing today, because I know everybody's instantly had to adapt to an online learning system. And we thought it would be really, really useful to just share some tips and tricks and ideas in as simple a way as possible into how you can utilize a lot of these systems. My current role, actually, I work in higher education. I train teachers at the moment. And so it's a really interesting time as we're starting to look at the impact of this on education as we go forward as well. So throughout the presentation today, I'm going to allude to some of these things as being not for the here and now and how they can impact on what we're doing in the current climate of the virus, but also the lessons that we can learn from this in terms of how we might use some of these approaches to support learners going forward. So ongoing CPD as well as kind of this, instant support that we want to offer to you all in this time of issue. So kind of introductions done. Let's think about what we're going to cover in the session. I want to talk about the considerations of using video. Video is going to be our tool at the moment. We're able to carry out this fantastic CPD offering to you all through the power of video. And there's certain things that need to go along with that as we consider how we use the video. We're going to talk about how we can share the content, what we can do with that, and some of the issues that need to be raised around the sharing of the content as well, and how we utilize some different platforms. So we'll come on to that a little bit later. And then just some ideas about how we can use the video in lessons. Like what does the video actually have within it? What are we going to be talking about? The kind of ideas of different types of videos, so how-to videos, recorded sessions, and live sessions. And so we'll just have a conversation around some of the implications of that. I also wanted to walk through a few of the different platforms that you may or may not have heard of. There is a range of things out there, and I just wanted to just share some of those things to give you a bit of an overview of what can be done and where they might sit in terms of your teaching and obviously the things that your students are doing in the classroom. I'm going to start with this, and again, this is because I think we're at a huge transition, and we have been before the coronavirus. The use of technology in the classroom is a major thing. And this idea here about, the Gutenberg press back in 1439, changing how people communicated, having a huge impact on how we shared information. And we're really at this same situation now. I think as we start to utilize video now more and more and see the impact it can have on learning. Some of you may be watching this as a recording. Some of you obviously are here live at the moment. And there's a different way that we can start to share that information. And this is kind of my starting point for you all, is to consider what is the long-term impact of this. The Gutenberg press has had a huge impact on society and the sharing of information. And we're almost at that point at the moment where we're equally going to see a huge change in what we do. So I kind of urge people as they're going through this process to also reflect on the impact it's having on both your teaching, but also the learners in your classroom. What difference does being able to review things in their own time have on their learning? And how can we better utilize some of the resources that we've possibly seen and utilized to some extent in our teaching, but we're definitely now going to have to develop that use as we go forward. When we think about our students, depending on where you are in the world, you'll see that the mobility of learners and how they access knowledge has hugely shifted. With the growth of mobile devices, smartphones, tablets, whatever it might be, students have access to knowledge wherever they are, whenever it is in the day. Used to be, obviously, when I was in school, knowledge was something I gained from going to school. It was between the hours of 9 and 3 for me. And that was where I got new stuff. I've got a 10-year-old son, and I noticed that school is a place for him to learn new things, but not the only place. He will come home and he learns magic tricks. He'll learn how to draw by going on the internet, and typically it's through finding video. It's through finding something which has an alternative way to teach him something, and he sees that he can find knowledge outside of school as well. And I think that's a common theme for learners as we're kind of in this age. And I think we can utilize a lot of this now going forward, because this is the norm to a lot of our learners. It might not be the norm to a lot of us as educators, but it's definitely the norm to a lot of our learners. And I think we can kind of hold on to that in some respect, to think that although there is a big shift in what education looks like currently, it might not be that big a drastic change for our learners. Obviously, the social interaction is going to be hugely impacted, and that's possibly a conversation for another day. But their ability to understand how they can utilize the video and how they can still learn from it, I think is definitely going to be there in their minds. These are just some statistics I thought would just be useful to share with everybody. And you know, it's not up-to-date figures from yesterday, but rough figures around total population. And then when you look at the total number of mobile users, the difference there, although you know over 2 billion, there's an awful lot of mobile use going on, and a lot of those people are connected to the internet. And I think we can safely assume that in this connected world that we live in now, students are going to have access in some aspect to the technology that's going to enable them to continue accessing learning, accessing their educators, accessing support. And I think this kind of shows that a lot. Even if we look all the way down to the mobile social media users, it's still a very high figure. And when you consider into that as well that anyone under the age of 13 shouldn't really be using social media, and we know they do, but these figures are going to take into account the people that should be using. You know, it's still a very high proportion, and there's those alternative methods of how can we get information out and how can we support students online, and something on the social interaction element. How do we make sure that people are still connected and don't feel completely isolated, even though they might be in isolation from each other? So very, very key things there to kind of think about, and something to hold on to when people worry about the access that learners have to things. They might not have a PC in every household, but the chances are that they should have access to some sort of mobile technology and at least a web browser. Again, this is something from Douglas Adams that I use when I talk about this whole idea of technology. And I think what you'll find here is that you'll fit into one of these brackets. Anything that was in the world when you're born is normal. That's kind of where a lot of our learners are. Okay, depending on the age of the learners that you have. Again, having an 11-year-old son, you know, he used to swipe the TV screen to change channels because we had iPads in the house when he was born, and he understood that's how he would swipe through an iPhone or an iPad. And so why would the TV not work that way? You know, the innate kind of understanding of, well, that makes sense that I could just do this. Why does the TV screen not work in the same way? Then there's the second step. So anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting. I'm outside of this barrier, but I kind of feel like I sit inside this barrier. I do find it quite exciting. And again, you're going to have learners which, you know, it might be new to them, certainly that the bottom end of this category, but they're going to be excited by it in new revolutionary devices that enable them to have a go and play with things. And then there's this top bracket, that it's against the natural order of things. This is the fear factor. Okay, so when I've done consultancy work with schools, you see all of these things in one place. I will have the young children who will absolutely grab hold of technology, grab hold of what they can do with these things and run with it. You get the young teachers, as they're called, that are happy to have a go. And then apparently, if you're over the age of 35, there's an issue there. Now, I don't believe that completely. I think it's a nice way to kind of position these things. But it's also important to take into account that people are at different points in terms of their knowledge and understanding and usage of these tools. So that's what I'm going to think about in terms of how we look at the things that we could use in the classroom, use online on our online classrooms, and considering different people's starting points and obviously the end user of all of these things. And again, this is a really, really important element, I think, when we're talking about the use of technology. And this comes from, you know, some writing from Malcolm Gladwell about the tipping point. And I think what we're going to see on the back of this, and I'm going to reiterate it again, is this idea that as we accept this technology, we are going to push across this tipping point. And for a lot of your learners that experience what they're going to experience in terms of their education over the next few weeks, months, we've reached that tipping point, and that the students will then kind of hope that some of the things that they've been exposed to in online learning will continue in the classroom as well, and that they potentially might still have access to elements of online learning. So again, you know, let's view this as ongoing professional development, and not just really a reaction to obviously what's going on at the moment. And I hope in that way then it feels more beneficial in terms of people's time that you're going to invest in making sure these systems work and work well for the learners. And this is why this comes from the Future of Jobs report from the World Economic Forum. You may or may not have seen some of these kind of ideas floated around. Social media is big on sharing these things, and it really is impacting on lots of curricula around the world. These are the top 10 skills that are required for the modern workplace, according to surveys across several industries. And when we look at the top 3 here, I think we're in a position at the moment where we can start to really think about how can we develop these other skills of problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, because they're things that you can do from a distance if you set up the learning environment right. We are in a position where I guess our learners might have a little bit more time to think critically. We're all doing this complex problem solving at the moment, and I think students are going to be having to solve lots of complex problems for themselves in how they go about their learning, depending on the age of the learner. And creativity, you know, this is creativity in itself, you know, thinking about how do we make sure that learning can move online in a very smooth way, but also what is it that students do with the learning? There's been lots of discussion recently around the world around what is online learning going to look like? Is it going to be a case of continuing where we left off and carrying on trying to teach online? Or is it a case of consolidating the skills? Do we just take this time to not try to impart anything new to our learners, but use the opportunity to get them to understand some of the things that we've learned before? There's more time here where we can actually get them to go into a little bit more depth in terms of application of their knowledge, and creativity being one of the top skills would be a fantastic way to get them to think about what they do with that knowledge, and what they can change in the world as a result of having that knowledge. And I think if we're learning anything at the moment from this virus, we're all having to be very creative with our approaches to things, and learners, I think, will have a different view on what they can do as a result of the situations that they're in. Okay, so let's think about using video a little bit more. These are just a few things that I'm certainly doing in my own practice at the moment when I'm still trying to ensure that my learners in university have access to learning. One thing is around creating how-to guides, because I want to make sure that my students have access to the processes. Now, this is something you do in your classrooms. You will model to your students you know, what it is you're trying to get them to learn, be that through the use of technology in the classroom, or even just through using the whiteboard and drawing on the board. You will model to your students what you're hoping for them to achieve. This obviously then allows those learners to be able to see what the expectations are very clearly and be able to follow the instructions. So creating simple how-to guides is a great tool for allowing your students to work at a distance from you. Now, the benefit of doing this through video is that that video can be watched as many times as they need, which is a fantastic way to get them to engage in their learning. But also for those learners that just might need a little bit of extra time, they can go back and recap what they've been doing. And this is where I was talking earlier about the idea of let's take heed of what we're doing at the moment and think about its impact in general. so it doesn't become just something we do for the next few weeks or months, that it becomes something that can become embedded in our practice. From my experience, what I've seen is students that have access to watch explanations over and over again as many times as they need to get full understanding, understand things in a better way. You'll see this in your class. There are students which will want to put their hand up a lot to check understanding. That becomes quite time consuming for you. So think about the idea of being able to create a guide for them that they can watch in their own time. That way they can check as many times as they need without any worries about having to put their hand up or highlighting to anyone else in their class that they might be going slow. The second one then is your instructional video creation. This is the longer kind of impact. This is where we actually do the teaching. So the creating of a how-to guide is just, this is a process, and then the instructional video is developing that process into actually application of learning. These are going to be longer videos. I've put on the screen here about screen recording, basically what's happening at the moment, talking over a presentation, allowing the learners to be able to understand a little bit more depth around what we're talking about. Again, these can be viewed in their own time and watched as many times as they want, but they would definitely be a longer piece of instructional video. So just some considerations before we go into looking at some of the platforms that you would be able to use in your classroom. The first one, and possibly the most important one, is accessibility. In your classrooms, you'll consider this in terms of differentiation for your learners or personalization of learning, where you make sure that every learner has equitable access to the content. Now, when it comes to creating online materials, the same applies here. You need to make sure that anything that gets created is accessible to all of your learners. Now, at first, this might seem like it's a lot more work to do, but actually, from experience, it cuts down a lot of work, because when you think of all learners in that first instance, you end up creating better resources for everybody to be able to access. When we talk about accessibility, we're talking about those students that might be hard of hearing. So doing any audio recordings, you need to consider, are you attaching captions to this? Are you putting in place a transcript that they would be able to read through that goes alongside the video? How are you making sure that those students that might not be able to hear everything that's been explained still have access to that? Same applies for those then that might be blind. Obviously we have our voice that they can hear, but you have to consider about how do you give that extra level of detail when you describe things so that everybody can view it in those same ways. We're obviously considering accessibility of those that might need to watch things over and over again. That comes hand in hand with the fact that they have video in the first place, which I think is a really, really good tool. And again, something definitely to learn from in terms of your practice going forward, because having those students be able to do things in their own time is a huge impact. So the second consideration is the length of the video. I will always remember being in school, and school days are quite long for learners, and we're always told that as teachers, try and keep your input to around 20 minutes before you let them to go and do something else. And this applies in the same way, possibly even more, when it comes to video, because there's nothing else there to keep their attention other than the video that's in front of them. In the classroom, you've got lots of tips and tricks that you can try in order to maintain the attention of your students, but you really do only have one source, and that is the video. So how are you going to maintain their attention? So some of the things that are useful here to consider are, make sure that video is timely and little snippets of information that will keep their attention for that time. The Pew Research Centre has looked into some of this and done some research on how long do people stay on YouTube videos, and how long do they stay on news reports, and lots of different video kind of tools in terms of what is the maximum level of interest. And their findings actually were that the best kind of, or the highest scored videos were videos that were about 2 to 5 minutes long. because that was when people kind of had their maximum attention, and anything longer than that, people would tend to switch off. Now, this is for kind of entertainment purposes, and they viewed it as general YouTube videos and news reports that might be put online as well. What you would then assume for our learners is that their attention span would probably be slightly longer than that, because they understand what they're watching the video for. This is about their learning. So my advice here would be probably about 10 to 15 minutes as a maximum level of input in any one kind of section, before you then look at some other things that you can do to support those learners. The other bit that came out of the research was videos that scored higher in terms of engagement of the audience were videos that included humor. Now, this is difficult at the moment. I mean, we are teachers first. We are not comedians. That's not our role. But I think what I'm taking from a lot of that research as I've looked at it is the personal approach in your video. So it doesn't necessarily have to be very formalized in terms of the content that you put across. I think what students will benefit from in any creation of these videos is going to be you being personal in that human kind of aspect with them. I think if we just kind of rattle through presentations and just talk over them and it's all about content, I think that can become quite dry, and I think that might be something where students lose the attention. I think if we can just, I'm not saying tell jokes every 2 seconds. That's really not the approach, unless that is your usual approach in the classroom. Then carry on. But I think if we can just make things a little bit more personal with the learners and real, I think is definitely something. I was very conscious before doing this webinar about what was in the background behind me. It's been a case of tidying the rooms to make sure that if my video is going to be on display in lots of other people's houses, that I probably should just make sure it's a little bit tidier. I have seen lots of videos of people on social media where they've captured what they might look like, and in their backgrounds it was a complete mess, and they've considered doing lots of DIY as a result of being on video conferences. So it's realistic. I think everyone's in a different time at the moment, but key thing here, length of the video, 10 to 15 minutes, short and snappy. If that means creating a couple of different videos for one topic, then it just allows those learners to be able to just capture things in a short, condensed time. Possibly one of the biggest ones here, because this directly relates to what we do as educators in the classroom, is the interactivity. If learning was as simple as just putting content out there, we'd all be out of jobs as educators. The interactivity is what you do in the day-to-day classroom practice. When you think about the questioning, you think about the feedback that you offer to your learners, and making sure that they engage with the content. And this is something to really consider when we think about putting together our videos. I mean, we will have a Q&A at the end of this session specifically because I would hope that some of the things that we've discussed in this webinar are going to raise questions, and people are going to reflect on them. And we know that reflection is the key point in terms of learning. If we reflect on the things that we do, we start to process a little bit more, and the questions are an important part of that learning. Some research that I've looked into around interactivity says that we really do need to ask questions. And I looked at some research around the use of video as an instructional tool. And the research showed that 3 groups were tested over time. The first group were just given online stuff, a presentation with no video. Second group were just given videos, and the third group were given video but inbuilt questions alongside it. And the results were that the 2 groups, whether it was just video or just written content presentations, they scored the same. A remarkable increase when you engage the learners in the interactivity. So my kind of third tip as we go through these is definitely consider how are you going to engage the learners in some way. Could be through a quiz, could be through different web platforms that allow interactivity, and we'll look at some of those a little bit later. But definitely the key thing here is to make sure that there is a level of engagement that allows reflection on the content that you're sharing with them, whether it's asking a question or getting them to complete a task and then share that back to you afterwards based on what you've shared with them. It's your general classroom practice when all is said and done. The things that you do in your classroom still apply online, and it's really, really important that we think of those things. It would be possibly easier to just put a video up or just put up some worksheets, but evidence would say that it's definitely down to the fact that we consider the interactivity. And that kind of brings me on to a point which is really, really important, and that is the use of imagery. We've talked a bit about making sure that we keep attention, and imagery is something that can work here. I've seen lots of presentations where the screen is full of words and the people delivering them are basically just talking through what's on the screen. In my own research, looking at dual coding theory, that is a conflict to the brain. Okay, we're asking the brain to work on two channels which fundamentally operate in the same region. We're asking people to be able to listen to me linguistically, but also read at the same time, and that operates the same part of the brain. So when we use imagery, what we're doing is we're asking the viewers, the listeners, to actually make connections, and they're starting to use some of their visual cues in their brain alongside the linguistic cues. And that basically allows them to be able to process the information a lot easier. In doing research myself, there's another thing called picture superiority effect. That gave the figures of around 52% higher memory recall rates if you utilize pictures alongside video, alongside language. Now, the evidence of this is in any modern foreign language online tools where they utilize imagery and words at the same time, because it's been known that's how the brain works. And if you look at any early learners in society, children learn through that as well. They'll have picture books, they'll have sound and picture books. Lots of the TV programs that they might watch are very full of imagery and then simple words and the mix of those two things. And that doesn't change as we get older. So definitely consider that use of imagery when you're adding things in. Now, this is something that I wanted to share as a result of this. This is called sketchnoting, which you may or may not have heard of. This is a sketchnote that I did on a presentation that was held at our university about some changes to our curriculum in Wales. Ignore for a second the content in here. The idea is that throughout this hour-long session, I just doodled, and I doodled what was being said and tried to make sense of it. And for me, what this created is an understanding in my head of what was being said to me, as opposed to a written transcript, if I'd just written notes down of what was being said. And engaging in this way has enabled me to probably make more sense of what was being said to me. And the reason I share this with you now is because this is a really, really simple process that you could ask your learners to do, if we go back to the idea of interactivity, in order for them to be able to put together their own visual note-taking based on the sessions that you might be putting online for them. What does it mean to them? How can they make sense of it? And I think when I look at this picture now, I can almost revisit that session. There's no order specifically to this. I mean, you can see that there are arrows on the screen, there are links between certain elements, but really this is how my brain put down the information onto paper. So sketchnoting is just a perfect model of how you can alternate that visual cue to learn from and link it to the information that's being shared with you in that linguistic sense as well. And then finally, this is something which I think is going to be really, really important. Following up on any learning that happens online is obviously important, and online learning's been happening in various guises for a long time now before this. And those follow-ups, what do you do at the end, are very important, obviously. I think what we also need to consider here is the long-term follow-up on whatever we're doing. I've got a friend who teaches in Hong Kong. They're in like week 8 now of their online learning, and he was talking to me recently about the need to really take stock of what state the students are going to come back to school in. So when you open up the school again, what is the impact on learning? And I think it's a really important message, because when students are away from us, we don't have full control over what they're doing, when they're doing it, how they're doing it. In the classroom, it's easy to monitor learning from a distance. There is obviously a consideration there on how do we follow up on what has actually been achieved in terms of this distance. And I'm hopeful that a lot of you will see some real positives in this. And I think in my own thoughts and through some of the work that I've done already with my students online, I have seen students engage in a very, very different way to the learning when I've given it to them as an online tool. And I've had lots of positive comments come back actually, where they've suggested that they actually preferred this method. Now, whether that was because they get bored of me standing in front of them, or the time of the lecture doesn't agree with them, I'm not sure. But it's still good to know, and good for, I think, everybody to think about what was the impact of doing what you're doing now in a different way, and how might that change your approaches going forward. But the critical thing being, how do you know over the next few weeks and months what learning has taken place and what gaps might need to be filled as a result? So I think what kind of came to us in terms of a focus was lots of schools are using Microsoft, and we thought it might be useful to just have a look briefly through some of the tools that are available and different ways that you could use them. And hopefully this kind of next section that we walk through now will just really be able to highlight some of the approaches that you can take. Now, I'm aware that different schools and different institutions will have access to different tools, but really the approaches that lots of these tools offer will be very, very similar. So I think it would be useful to just sort of go through some of these as a group, and then if there are any questions, obviously please do ask us at the end. So I'm just going to jump out of my presentation for a second and bring up my my screen with just some of the different tools on there. Now, the first one I wanted to look at was Microsoft Teams. Now, I'm just going to apologize in advance. This is my my workspace for university. So some of these things are things that we do in university. The way Microsoft Teams works, if you haven't used Microsoft Teams before, is it allows you to create a class fundamentally, which then allows you to populate information, set up ways that you can keep in contact with your students. It goes into a lot of detail. You can go to various lengths of how you need to do this. I'm going to keep it really, really simple in this first instance to just show the basic process of how you might go about doing this. So this is my Teams. Obviously, you need to log into this with school accounts. Once I'm in this, over on the side here, I'm in the Teams tab, and I'm going to go to Join or Create a Team. So I'm going to select this, and this gives me the opportunity to create teams. Now, because this is my university set, we have teams already that I could simply join, but we're going to go over here and create a new team. And then we've got 4 options. We're going to focus really on 2 of these options. The first being class. So this is my classroom. So if you want to create a classroom for your learners in your setting, go down this route. But I also want to just draw attention to the staff one. Again, not sure the setup of different people on here, but the staff teams area also allows the teams to work well remotely, obviously at this point, being able to share information, setting up video calls. So everything I show you in the class, just bear in mind that you could set up the same thing as a staff. There are just slightly different restrictions on it, because obviously as staff, people are going to be a lot more trusted. In a classroom, you want to maintain that level of privacy for certain aspects of what you're doing. For instance, you can mute everybody in a class. As a staff room, it might be rude that you muted all of your colleagues, even if you might want to do that. So we're going to go into create a team. We're just going to set this up. So let's just go and say that this is the Beamer one. So the name of your team, nice and simple. Create the team. It's going to ask me to search for students. So in your instance, as you start typing a name, as long as they're enrolled in your school and they've got access to the Office 365 tools, you would be able to just join them in here. And also the teachers. I think this is a useful one. Many of you might be teaching across different groups and have various other people that might want to have sight of your class as you share work with them. So you can add other teachers in there as well, and they get the same kind of level of access as you would. I'm just going to jump through this though. And then this is what happens. I end up with my class over on the left-hand side. This is sort of general comments and things that I can upload, class materials, documentation, and also this kind of mirrors this social networking kind of aspect where along the bottom here, I can have a conversation with my students. So it might just be a hello everyone, welcome to today's learning, and point them in the right direction for things. Any questions that students might have, you'll see this as a flow. And what's quite nice here is that all the students would be able to access this as well. So if one student has a question that 5 other students have the same question and you answer it, it's open to everyone. So I think that's a really, really nice tool in order to maintain that community aspect of learning. Second one along is your files. So what this will do is access all of your files that you have. You can upload files. Now, what you need to be careful here is the class materials, anything I put into that class materials is viewable to the class. What you don't want to do is start uploading your entire library worth of materials, because the students would be able to see it. So this is why you're selective, and this is why there is a specific folder in the class materials. I would want my students to have access to things I want them to have access to. So again, good note here to just take stock of what it is that you want to share with them. But having said that, if I want them to have access to learning materials, it's a really, really quick and easy way for them to be placed all in the same area so that everybody knows where to find them. I'm going to jump across Class Notebook. What Class Notebook basically allows you to do is it sets up a notebook for each one of your students. There's not enough time on this call today to go through all of the complexities of this, but fundamentally when you create a class notebook, if I had all of my students aligned in here, they would all end up with a personal notebook that I would have sight of. But they wouldn't have sight of each other's. So it's a place where they can do their online work, share this back to me so I can keep a track of, their progress, etc. Going back to that idea that we said before of interactivity being key. But they wouldn't be able to, other students wouldn't be able to see there. So you can kind of be rest assured that there's a private element to this where students can, keep their own learning to themselves, and you're not going to have any copying of work from each other. Obviously, there's an assignment section. If you are still needing to set assignments, again, a very, very straightforward wizard takes you through the process to create an assignment, assign elements of support material that can go with this, put in a date that has to be submitted by, and then use it to grade. And again, beyond the coronavirus outbreak, this might be something that schools want to adopt because it does make feedback and assessment a lot easier as well. So that's kind of Teams in that aspect. One of the other things that is really, really nice when you're in Teams, if I go back to posts, is that we can also start to have face-to-face conversations here. I'm going to talk a little bit about live teaching later, but something which is really, really useful to consider when it comes to building that community or maintaining that community in your classroom is how you keep that contact between you and the students and each other. And I think, again, something that I've been learning a lot over the last 2 weeks is that social aspect is something that's really, really important. So when we're in this setting, what we can also do is set up chat groups. Now, again, apologies, this is some of this is my staff. I have asked permission if they mind their names being on a webcast at the moment. But what you can see here is you've got your contact lists, people that you've recently had conversations with. And then over here that we have the option to make a video call, just make an audio call, or share specific things around what's on your screen at the moment with your learners. This is a useful tool if you are going to go down the route of live teaching. and we'll talk about some of the aspects that need to be considered with live teaching in a second, but it's also just that kind of community aspect of keeping in touch with people. So I'll go through the basic process of how to set one of these up, because I think it's very useful, and talking to my own staff team around me, just a useful setup process. When you go to calendar, you choose the time that you want to create the call. That then takes you to the title, always useful to have in there so people know what they're joining for. You can set in here the attendees that you want to join your call as well, which I think is very, very useful. And then obviously set your time and your date for when you want that call to happen. Location, in this instance, it's instantly going to an online one because we're in Teams and we're going to be utilizing those things. And then it's as simple as that. I tap on save. It will send an email to every member of the group that I've invited to that team meeting. And then at the given time, they will get a reminder that will say join the meeting, and they just need to click the link and they will be able to join the meeting. That then enables you to obviously have these online conversations with your colleagues, with your students as well. And also, because this is in Teams, and I don't want to start a video call now because it's going to interfere hugely with what we're doing live at the moment. But you can access lots of your files as well and share your screen with the learners in exactly the same way as I'm sharing my screen with you now. And hopefully, modeling what we're doing at the moment helps to make sense in terms of that process of what this looks like. So that's just a really, really basic overview of some of the Office 365 tools and how they work. And like I said, Teams kind of condenses everything into one place, because your files, your OneDrive files, your contact with the learners, your assignments can all be kept in one neat place for you to organize for your students. So if I then just move on to the next section, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the range of tools that are out there. So we'll talk about the video creation in a second. But what I want to do is talk through some of the other tools. Office 365 and Teams is one approach to doing things, but depending on the age of the learners that you've got in the classroom, there might be some other tools which also lend themselves nicely. So on the right-hand side here, I've just listed a few, and you can find many others that will do very, very similar tasks. These are some of the possibly the most popular ones that are being utilized at the moment. So again, I'm just going to walk through some of these with you now. Seesaw, if you haven't seen Seesaw before, Seesaw is what they call a learning journal. What Seesaw offers is a very, very simple interface for learners to join. This is a demo class that I use when I do some consultancy with students and staff around the country. And what you'll see here is a timeline really of work that's been uploaded in various formats. You'll see some of it is whiteboards, some of it is video uploads, just pictures. There's various different things that you can upload to this. And then over here on the right hand side are the students in my class. Now I've just numbered these just because it's something from a GDPR point of view. I didn't want to be sharing actual student names, but what I can do on each one of these is if I tap on the student themselves, I then just get a list of that student's work. And you'll see here that if they've collaborated on something, then actually I get a group of students' work. Now with your younger learners, this is a really, really nice way. One, it allows them to have this community aspect still. It's very easy to share some very simple things. If I go to the plus at the top here and go to post student work, you'll see these are the range of ways that I can input things. So again, for your younger learners, you could be asking them to just do a simple drawing of something, and they get a drawing tool here, and they can draw whatever it might be. In an instant, my artwork is not great, but there we go, we've got a little alien face. But what's also nice here is the ability to record voiceover. So again, the same way that you might be creating these videos for your learners, the students can interact back with you in various different ways. And Seesaw lends itself really, really nicely to that. It's a shame to delete my little alien. I was quite proud of that. So that's what Seesaw looks like, and there's some of the offerings it allows you to do. Again, not enough time to go into all of the different levels of things that you can do with this, but there are some great features in here that will be very beneficial depending on the age of the learner you're looking at. The next one to look at in a very, very similar guise is Shobi. Shobi, in the same way, allows me to create classes, as you can see over here on the side, some of these classes that I use with my students, and some that are just demo activities. So I create a class, I share the class, students join my class from a distance, very similar to Teams. I'm going to go into this one here. This is an activity I did a few years ago with a group of learners, just because it allows me to model the setup. So what I've done here is these students have joined my class. In the shared items, very similar to how Teams has that class folder, these are all things that are shared with everybody. So everyone can see my feedback to them, everyone can see the resources that I'm sharing, the videos, etc. And I can just type in new comments, or I can add in any of these things as well. What the students then see, if I tap on this first student here, is that same level of information from me, but I also get to see their individual personalized responses too. So in this instance, this was a project we were doing around how the body moves. I shared with them a template. They then would upload their work back to me. I would be able to give them some feedback, some additional content that I felt might be useful for them. And they would continue to then offer me their work, and I could mark their work as well. So it keeps everything nicely condensed in one place. Now, this is great for classroom practice, but I think as you move online, it also offers a really, really good way to, again, help track what the learners have been doing, keep in contact with the learners, allow learners to do things in a style that might suit them. You could imagine that as well as just the written uploads here, I could post a video. So there is the option to create a video and post these in here. I'm on the web version at the moment. If I was on my iPad, I'd be able to record that video live as well. So it gives me that better interaction. And it just keeps that flow. And then when we get back to school, I've got all of this evidenced. And this is kind of one of those key things. We talked about how do we monitor things at the end of this whole process. I think in this instance, I've got really good insight into what the students have done, how engaged they've been. I've got evidence of their progress, if they hopefully make progress. And it's just a nice tidy way to keep all of that together. And again, you know, there are lots of other functions that you can look at in this going forward, but really I thought today's session should really be about just showing you the range of ways you can do things and an example of what it could look like. The next one I'm going to look at is Flipgrid. Flipgrid is an Office 365 tool to a certain extent. It's a Microsoft tool, so if you have access to an Office 365 account, then Flipgrid comes with that as well. And what Flipgrid offers is a slightly different approach to how you can engage with your learners and offer feedback and use video. I'm going to go into just a basic practice class that I've created just to show you really how it's set up. These are the topics that you have for your class, so imagine them as a different lesson or a different piece of content you wanted to share. You can easily create new topics. You add in the topic title, you can add in a video that you know, stimulates them, and you can change the length of time. And then basically what happens for your learners is they respond by video. So it kind of goes back to what we were saying before about the world that students live in, this kind of social media kind of aspect of the world, use of video in order to share information with each other. And what this does, if I go into a grid where I've had some responses, in this one here, you can see that as I've set this kind of activity to say hello, people have been able to then respond, and they send back a video. I'm not going to play any of these for privacy reasons for the people that have uploaded them. But what this builds is kind of this video response system where people can watch your video and then give a response below it. So from a teaching online point of view, you can set yourself a really, really nice short but sweet introduction to a lesson, and then have students respond and reflect on the things that you're asking them to do in a very, very quick and simple way. So that's Flipgrid. Next one here to look at is Google Classroom. Classroom, really don't need to go into huge amounts of detail here, only to say that it's very, very similar to what Teams look like. Here we have our stream, so this is our communication section. We have our classwork section here, so we can assign work to the students here. And again, we can mark things and we can add new students in it. So again, Classroom as an alternative tool to structure your online learning. So all the things we've talked about, use of video, making sure things are interactive, these are tools and platforms that will support you with that. And then the last one here to just talk about is Edpuzzle. This is something that we use in university with my students. And the reason I use this is because when I create my content, if I go into one of my lectures that I've delivered recently, what this also allows me to do is along the bottom here, you'll see these black dots. And what these black dots represent is a question. And what happens in my video is the video will stop. I've inputted these pauses for thought, and then I've asked them to respond to a question. And the way Edpuzzle works is you can set it to not allow them to continue watching unless they respond. So you're almost forcing that interactivity. Now, the feedback I've had from my learners, and bear in mind they're all over the age of 18, they're all adult learners in university, is that they found that actually really quite useful, that forced reflection. And I considered, the amount of times in a lecture in university face-to-face, and I've asked a question and maybe 2 or 3 people might respond. The results of this is actually everybody responds to varying degrees, but it forces that kind of idea that they have to communicate back to you with a thought or an opinion. So going back to the research that I talked about with Floor, that they're really having to reflect on those things that I'm offering them within a learning session. Okay, great. I am really conscious of time. I really wanted to make sure that I got a lot of information out there to people. So I'm just going to go through the last couple of things now. Zoom is a video conferencing platform, very similar to the platform we're using at the moment. I'm not going to advocate one tool over the other, but I'm going to talk briefly really about what live learning looks like and just some thoughts on live learning. One thing that I've learned over the last week or so when the whole world kind of went into isolation was the strain this has put on lots of services and the strain this has put on the internet worldwide and things slowing down. So that's something to consider. What is the strength of your signal in order to carry out live sessions? And live sessions are great because very similar to this, if anybody has any questions directly after this, I'm here and we can have those conversations. So there's a real benefit to doing things live. Next thing is the tone of voice. How do you make sure that people are engaged? How do you make sure that people want to learn more about things? I consider the irony when I do this, talking about tone of voice, as some of you might then consider what my tone of voice has been like throughout. But it is definitely something to consider. Your equipment, really important. What equipment do you have? Do you use headphones? Costa and myself tested this system beforehand, which was really good because he was able to give me feedback on a slight lag in the audio coming through. So we moved to a different system. Interactivity, again, how do you make sure that you have that? Do you use a chat window? Do you use a quiz system? How can you build that level of interactivity to ensure that you hit that next point, which is connecting with your audience, making sure that they're on board, that they know what you're talking about. And then student video. This is really, really important. You've got to bear in mind now that everyone's at home, and when you use anything like this, you are in that person's home. Do you want the students to have their video on? Is it important to have their video on? Do you take into account where they are in their house? Children might be using this in their bedrooms. There's obviously issues around that. And asking parents for permission, really, I think is an important note here. The last one then, hands up and a chat window. Costa's got this all worked out. He's done this many times before to understand that if we were all able to talk at the same time, it was going to get very noisy. And if people wanted to ask questions, again, it's going to get very noisy. So the ability to have a chat window that you can review questions and then respond to them afterwards is a really, really good bit of advice. So I'm just going to look very, very briefly now at some ideas of making video, and just a couple of programs that I think would be useful to consider going forward when it comes to making your videos. First one is Clips. Clips is an Apple video creation tool that comes on iPads and iPhones. And the way it works is it allows you to just take images or video and then layer it with extra levels of content. So everything on this works through the big red bar in the middle. You hold that down to record your video for the length of time you want that image or video to be on your screen. It comes with posters, which are pre-made for you to help make your videos look really, really nice, give the context to what it is you're looking at. It also allows you to make things segmented. So if you want that pause for thought, you know, a nice poster can just be put into those elements throughout. When you tap on the star, which is alongside the red bar, you also get the option to change what your screen looks like. Filters obviously can be useful for various different things, depending on what you're putting across, but that's more for a style point of view. The key ones that I wanted to highlight are the ability to layer text on your screen, which can add that extra level of information to imagery that you might be using, and also stickers. There are some silly ones in here. This is a tool for making fun videos that you might share from an education point of view. These stickers here, the arrows, the circles, just drawing attention to certain elements of your video, I've found to be very, very useful. And then the next thing to look at are emojis. Again, when you think about accessibility, emojis could be very, very useful just to, you know, they instantly get across a different language that I think a lot of our learners understand. You know, the smiley emoji, the sad emoji, and the full range of the dozens of emojis that are out there now. Again, just consider how you might use them to create your videos. And then the main key point of why I wanted to talk about this is when I talked earlier about accessibility, what Clips allows you to do is turn on live titles. And when you turn on live titles, when you speak, it turns your voice into text directly onto your video. That means that instantly you have a captioned video that you can share with your learners, which give them that alternative way to access things. So for your students that might be hard of hearing, you instantly have a tool that hasn't taken you any longer to create that also has captioning built into it. And you can choose a whole range of languages for this. So I know that many of you being in the international school community will have students with different first languages, and I think this is a really, really useful tool. You can speak in that language and it will also put that directly onto the screen in that language as well. And this is kind of an example of what it can look like. You can have annotations, etc., over the top. I'd love to do this live, but again, we didn't want to push the system too much in light of the increased internet traffic to do a live demo on this. But you can see here that's roughly, you know, what you can do with this imagery, extra words, and obviously, if I was playing this as a video, you'd see all of that as well. There we are. And then the last thing, very, very quickly to talk through is screen recording. Screen recording on devices allows you to very, very quickly create instructional videos. If you're on an iPad or an iOS device, I'm going to just quickly go through how you can utilize this. When you go to your settings screen, if you choose Control Center, and then on Control Center, choose the Customize the Controls. Within Customize Controls, you're looking for the screen recording option. Now, if it's not turned on, it's going to be in that bottom section under More Controls. You just tap on the green plus and move it to the top section. And then to access that, you just simply drag down from that top right corner of your device where the battery icon and the time tend to be. Drag down and you'll see the circle with the circle inside it. That's screen recording. Now, if you tap and hold on screen recording, you can also turn on the microphone. And then when you start your recording, everything that you say and everything that you do will be recorded on your screen, giving you a really, really nice, concise video of a talk over of anything. Let's imagine you were playing a presentation. You can just play that on your screen and talk through it. You could also show students how to use different applications. If you want them to understand how to use different web tools, you could just load them up on your device, screen record, talk over the top, and away you go. You've got a great video that you can share with those learners. Also great to use as a whiteboard. If you just open up like a notes app or a drawing app, you can do a screen record and you can demonstrate to them mathematical problems, etc. And again, nice, simple, quick way to create a how-to video. So lastly, I just wanted to kind of talk about the learning from around the world. Various countries have gone through this at various different times. Here in the UK, where I am at the moment, we are in the first week of school closure, so we're in day 3 of it. There are countries, like I said, a friend of mine in Hong Kong who's 8 weeks into this, and learning from them, the one thing that I have heard a lot is less is more. We can quickly want to replicate our classrooms in the home learning environment, but I think we also have to credit ourselves with us being educators and trained teachers. It's not as simple as just sending everything home and hoping that the parents will do the best. There's a reason why you do what you do. There's a reason why you are paid professionals in your field of expertise. That is because what you do in the classroom is very important. So the one sort of tip to kind of finish with now is to say, you know, recognize your talents and recognize that you can't distribute yourself to everybody's household. And at the same time, you know, the parents at home possibly have also got to work from home, etc. So less is more. Project-based approaches, giving things that students can work on in their own time, seems to be working very well around the world as well. So really, that's it from me. I hope that has been a useful kind of summary of some of the things that you can do, and I look forward to answering any questions that people might have as a result. So Costa, I guess.
I'm here, I'm listening
away.
Thank you very much, Matt. With lots of tips and things to go away and try. And it is one of those things that we have to try, you know, the new strategies and any new devices until we get better at them. So the first or second time, like anything, it might be a bit difficult, but as we get used to using the technology, you know, it should get easier. And I'm sure within your schools, for those of you that are listening to us live, right now, you have someone to go to who you can discuss some of these the devices and strategies that we've mentioned today. We've got some questions that have come in, so I'm going to go straight away to Amanda, who's listening to us from Dubai. So good evening, shall I say, to you, Amanda. She says, Matt, you were talking about sharing your screen with learners about how, but how would you do this easily? Does this also mean that learners might see everything you have open, e.g. email and documents?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the ease of sharing the screen depends on the platform you're using. Obviously, we've got a WebEx tool here, or not WebEx, sorry, the GoToMeetings tool here that allows me to do it. When I was in Teams before, if you've got Teams, yes, you can share your screen. The key learning here is it shows what you can see. So emails, etc. It just makes sure that everything is off your screen at that point. I know in preparing for this today, I made sure that I closed everything down that I didn't want open, because, you know, it is as simple as that. Now, I am only sharing my screen, so I have full control of that. So they will only see what I want them to see. So I guess it's down to preparation and making sure that you know what it is you want them to see at any given time. And it also goes for thinking about your background, right? So if you're on a video call with people, I kind of joked around this before in terms of tidying the room around you, but it's also important to note that you're in your house and you may have other members of your family in the house, and just making sure that people don't walk in and you know, that they don't want to be in the video as well. So yeah, if you go back and watch over the video again, the Teams allows you to share your screen quite easily. It's a shame that we couldn't do that kind of live, but I really want to sort of break the system. But when you go into it, it is quite simple. There is a button along the bottom that just says share screen and gives you the option to choose what you want to share to the students.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. There's another question that's coming from Maria, who's listening from Madrid. So good evening to you, Maria. if we create videos, how do we make it private if we wanted to share on YouTube?
Good question. Yeah. So when you upload anything to YouTube, the first screen that you get when you upload the video allows you to title your video. And then there will be an option, or three options, in fact. One will be private, one will be unlisted, and the last one is public. Now, public means anyone can see it, anyone can search for it. So if you did a video on the history of Madrid, and someone typed in history of Madrid, chances are they would find your video. Unlisted means that it's not searchable, but can be viewed by anyone that you send the link to. And private is the kind of highest level of security, which enables you to specifically allow access to certain individuals. Now, in a school environment, that's a good one to use, but it does mean that you have to type in the email address of everybody you want to share it to, so it could be a little bit longer in terms of that. The unlisted one allows you to share the link, and the people that have the link can then watch it, but it does also mean that if they share that link onto anyone else, they would also have access to it. So they're your three levels that you can use, depending on the level of privacy that you really want to put on any of your videos.
Thank you, Matt. We've got a couple of other questions. We're going to do this really quickly because we are running out of time, I'm afraid.
Sure.
Chad Moore, don't know where Chad is at the moment, where you're listening from, but good evening to you. What platform is best for a school that does not have students set up for school email accounts?
Okay, that's a great one. So both Seesaw and Showbie both allow students to join with usernames as opposed to emails. How you would get that information to them, I guess you'd have to use whatever processor is using at the moment, but I know Showbie allows you to access just by creating a username, and they would have a code which would link them to your class. Seesaw also allows a QR code to be able to attach to the class. So again, if you can get that QR code to your learners, they simply scan it with the app and they would be able to join your class. No need for any email addresses. Obviously, that's really useful for your younger learners because depending on where you are in the world, individuals under the age of 13 shouldn't have like personal email accounts anyway. So that might be the solution. Yeah.
I hope that helps, Chad, and do let us know how you're getting along. And we have another question from David Cooper. From a student point of view, any ideas where to bring all the tools together in one place? If we can answer that really quickly for David.
Yeah, I'd say anything like Teams or Google Classroom is they are designed to have everything in one place. I guess the same with Showbie. The ones I've tried to show you keep everything in one succinct place, even if you just use the chat windows as that links to external things. For your learners, they would just go to Teams and look in the chat window to make sure everything is concise.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all we've got time for another webinar. But thank you very much, everyone who's tuned in. And if you do need any more ideas or tips or any suggestions from us, then do get in touch with us by email. Thank you very much, Matt, for running today's session. And hopefully we can get you back soon to deliver some more sessions. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.